Today at the National Press Club, Ukraine's head of mission, Volodymyr Shalkivskyi. Russia's invasion has seen Ukraine appeal for international help to protect its sovereignty and restore peace. Today, Volodymyr Shalkivskyi, Chargé d'Affaires in Canberra, speaks to the National Press Club.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the National Press Club today for today's Westpac address. It's 2 weeks to the day since the invasion of Ukraine began. It was on dawn on February 24 when that began, and I think we all live in a different world now to the world before that date. So we're doing things differently today when we hear from the head of mission from Ukraine in Australia, Volodymyr Shalkivskyi, but before we hear from him, we're going to hear the Canberra Ukraine community sing the Ukraine National Anthem. Thank you, everyone, and thank you to the members of the local community here in Canberra, including, I think, a former staff member from the National Press Club who's helped to organise this. That's not something that we've ever done here, I think, before at the National Press Club, but as I said at the start, we are in a very different world now, and that is something that was totally fitting today when we're welcoming the head of mission from Ukraine in Australia, Volodymyr Shalkivskyi. Volodymyr has worked for 20 years as a diplomat for Ukraine in the United States and in Sweden. He came to Australia in 2019, and he told me a little bit earlier he's seen floods, he's seen bushfires. Of course, we never thought that we'd see what's happening in his home country now. We're going to have some short remarks from Volodymyr before we then go to questions from the media. I do want to then invite him up to make his opening remarks before we then go to some questions. Over to you. Please welcome Volodymyr Shalkivskyi.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate your initiative to have my community, Ukrainian community with me. It's important for me to have such sign of solidarity, and the idea with the national anthem is also very appreciated. If you translate our anthem, it's actually about struggle. Ukraine is an ancient country, more than 1,000 years old. But it's unfortunately our destiny. We are in the middle between West and East, and we had always to defend our territory, our land, our ethnicity from the foreign forces. So the words of our national anthem are very symbolic those days because it's about struggle, about a very high morale, and that we are not going to surrender. So I believe everyone in the world had possibility to witness that Ukrainians are fighting, fiercely fighting, and defending our country. But why it happened? Why it happened now? A number of factors. I believe it would be worth not to repeat political statements about solidarity and how everyone concerned, but just to give something new. So I will try to be brief. There are a combination of factors. First of all, make no mistake, this is not about NATO aspirations of Ukraine. This is not about attitude towards Russian speaking in Ukraine. What kind of attitude can be questioned by Kremlin when we have at least 300 Russian schools in Ukraine, while there is not any Ukrainian school in Russia, while we have 5 million Ukrainians in Russia. This is about a sick idea of a dictator to restore Soviet Union, something that constitutes the biggest tragedy for him personally. And he believed that this is the perfect timing. Russia is strong enough. The West, it is not correct to say the West was weak or is weak. In Putin's mind, West was divided. West was not united. So it was easy to play the game with West in order to divide and negotiate. Another point, of course, significant miscalculation by Kremlin, by Mr. Putin himself. While in the office, Mr. Putin effectively eliminated all independent thinkers, all people who can question him in terms of delivering the accurate or alternative positions or information. So during those years, only people who are loyal enough in terms of delivering only positive news survived. So believe it or not, but Mr. Putin do not use internet. He do not trust internet. He believes that Western media are just the channels for the Western propaganda that are used by Western governments. That's the story of Russia, actually. How do you, as you know probably, the only two independent media in Russia was closed just a couple of days ago. So every morning he receives the file with information from his intel about news around the world. And this picture during years was significantly compromised in terms of if you compare it to the real situation in the world. So he started to believe that, yes, actually what my intelligence is saying about Ukraine is true, that Ukrainian government is anti-Russian, it's pro-Western, it suppresses Ukrainian people, and what you need to do is just to invade the country with a short winning campaign, 3 days, 5 days max, install friendly government, Lukashenko type in Kyiv, eliminate all pro-Ukrainian activists and Ukrainian parliament members, and there was no intention to destroy Ukraine. It was this intention to destroy Ukrainian ethnicity, because he wanted to recreate Soviet Union. And Ukraine was just too important for him. There is no way you can recreate former Soviet Union or Russian Empire without Ukraine. Believe it or not, Russian soldiers in their backpack had not spare munition or food supply, but parade uniform. So they were supposed to capture Kyiv and have parade along our streets in the next couple of days. That is, it explains to some extent why are those huge columns of the Russian military machines are just stuck in the fields without moving, because they run out of oil, of petrol, they run out of food, they don't have clear instructions from their commanders, they are asking the locals how to get to the Kyiv. So it's quite amazing in terms of war planning. Another side of the story is so-called support of pro-Russian parties and pro-Russian activists. So, of course, it was long-term planning. It was not the statement of Mr. Putin was actually recorded 3 days before the attack. So it was planned operation. But the significant side of success of this operation was kind of devoted to the operations by the so-called sleeping agents, Russian agents in Ukraine, and pro-Russian parties. According to some estimates, Kremlin channeled $5 billion to support pro-Russian parties, Russian activists, and they were supposed to, along with the military attack, to have to seize the power in local administration, and but welcome to corrupt Russian regime. So $5 billion was kind of announced, and nobody knows how much money actually ended up in those poor spies, because probably Kremlin kind of strategists thought that if they provide with enough money, they will end up not in Kyiv, but in Monaco. So it was total failure of Russian conspiracy program or idea that it will be supported by pro-Russian coup, effective elimination of military objects, and of course very warm greeting by ordinary Ukrainian citizens. So again, Mr. Putin truly believed that people will greet with flowers, but the fact is people are greeting with Molotov cocktails. And it's also very important, because you can win a war against foreign army, but you cannot win the war against free people who are determined to fight for their freedom. I will stop here, because I know that the most important part is questions and answers. I can only add that I am really grateful to Australia for all support that is provided by the government, by ordinary citizens. We're receiving flowers every day in our embassy. We are having, 3-4 calls per minute. Someone is asking about bank accounts where they can donate money. Some are proposing host Ukrainian families. Some are actually traveling to Ukraine to help. It's very touchy. I am really thankful. Again, It's challenging time, but it's easy for me to work in Australia. Some of my colleagues work in Belarus. Believe me, it's quite a different story. I believe that this kind of support that we receive from around the world, and Australia is an important part of it, is crucial, because so far there is no indication that Kremlin is going to back off, that they are kind of planning of pulling back the troops. They're sending their negotiation team for consultations. Actually, today our foreign minister Kuleba will have a meeting with the Russian counterpart Lavrov in Turkey. But their mandate, their agenda, Russia is ready to accept our surrender. They are not ready to talk about some, negotiations about peaceful resolution. No. There is no indication that Kremlin is ready, honestly, discuss how to end it. And of course, we will use any opportunity that we have in order to stop killing civilians and children. Another point, final. Every war in the world eventually ends, sooner or later, hopefully sooner. We will need some kind of agreement with Russia. We have more than hundreds of years of history of agreements with Russia, bilateral agreements, that were always, the terms of those agreements were always violated by Russia, by their leaders. So this time, we will need third party to act as a guarantor of that agreement. I don't want to speculate about who is going to be, what country organization can be involved, but we need someone to have Russia commit and actually respect the provisions of that agreement, because we do not trust Russian government. There was an idea about UN Security Council. Having Russia as a member of UN Security Council, of course, make situation more complicated, but who can be included in that agreement? It's a good question. But we will pursue this discussion, this dialogue, because we would like to be free, democratic, liberal democracy country. We belong to the European family, and there is no way we will give up. Thank you.
Thank you, Volodymyr, for those remarks, and then we'll go to some questions. But I wanted to begin by asking you about one thing you said there about Vladimir Putin's plan to perhaps have a conclusion in 3 to 5 days, which is obviously not working out for him to plan. What's your assessment, can I ask, of the sense within your home country of the resistance to the Russian invasion? What's your assessment of how long that can last realistically? I mean, it's given what we're seeing on the TV every night in terms of the strength of the resistance and its ability to last.
I believe there is no need to retell the story that you can see on ABC or Sky News. There is high morale, high resistance. I'm not telling about 100% of population. We have already 2 million, at least, refugees in Poland and other neighboring countries in the West. But people are preparing to fight to resist. Even in those small captured cities, people go out in the streets with the Ukrainian flags. And Russians have to warn them with the weapons in order to because there was clear shift in strategy that their primary idea was to capture Kyiv, install pro-Russian government. It didn't work out well. Then they decided to, well, why don't we play the game that happened 100 years ago? The same story, Russian Bolsheviks tried to capture Ukraine. They didn't manage to capture Kyiv. They captured second major city, Kharkiv, and installed new government and announced about Ukrainian Socialist Republic, and then slowly moved to the west. But Kharkiv still standing. Then they captured this. We have 25 oblasts, regions. They captured one of the region, Kherson, in the south. And the idea was to have fake referendum, fake demonstration, to ask Russia probably to have independent Kherson People's Republic, something like this, like Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk, and slowly bite piece by piece the territory of Ukraine. But they needed show people in the streets with Russian flags. Yes, there were people in the streets, but with Ukrainian flags. So you can understand, and I have to give a credit to those people when you have Russian tanks and Russian soldiers in the streets with arms, and you are going in the street with the Ukrainian flags. You have to be brave enough. So there is high level of resistance. Of course, there are certain areas where we cannot provide supply of food, humanitarian assistance, and weapons. But we are determined to resist with all means that we have in our disposal. And the Western countries play a crucial role in terms of having supporting our resistance.
I know that you've been in Australia since 2019, and because of the pandemic, I don't think you've been able to go back to Ukraine in that time. However, can you tell us a little about family members and their experiences at the moment in terms of what they're going through and what the war means for them?
Yeah, I have the same picture as you have on TV and in internet, but I have my relatives back home. My cousins, they're actually fighting in the front line. But that's war. It's nothing special about. But my parents, they believe me, I asked them to evacuate from capital, from Kyiv, but they refused. They stayed, they're 72 years old. They preferred to stay, and they're making sandwiches to our military. The other day, and they're spending nights in bomb shelters. And as my father told me, 2 nights in bomb shelter is enough to completely change any pro-Russian sentiments that you have in your heart. And my mom, she's 73. She lives on the 7th floor of the multi-store apartment building in the northern part, so it's close to the attack zone. She saw some sabotage groups, and I was worried about her and asking, well, maybe you should go out. But she texted me, you know, I went to the balcony. I think it's a good position. Can you send me a recipe of Molotov cocktail? So that's the answer.
Your mum has the right fighting spirit, I think, doesn't she?
Well, that's at least, significant part of the population of Ukraine is determined to fight, and we have quite substantial diaspora around the world. It's up to 20 million people, actually, with Ukrainian heritage. And according to our information, 80,000 men of Ukrainian descent actually went back to Ukraine to help our territorial defense forces.
We have many journalists here to ask questions, so I'll go to the first question now, which is from Anna Henderson.
Anna Henderson, SBS World News, and firstly I'd like to thank you for your openness with the Australian media and particularly with SBS over the last few months. We've heard an ongoing discussion about whether we should be, as nations that support Ukraine, expelling Russian diplomats. I wanted to ask you, do you think that would have any impact on the Kremlin? Do you think that that would make any change? And secondly, what do you think the risks are of allowing representatives of Vladimir Putin to remain in countries like Australia?
Well, I am a diplomat, yes. I have to be in my diplomatic narratives, play along my diplomatic narratives. And I did what I can in order to play it. But when you have more than 50 children killed in your country due to the shelling, yes, I'd like Russian ambassador to be expelled. I'd like to have boycott of all Russian supply goods and services in Australia. I'd like to stop any shipping companies to enter Australian territorial waters. I'd like to fight that Australia join the fight in countering Russian propaganda, because they are still playing those narratives about Ukrainian suppression of Russian population somewhere, some days. We have to use all means that we have in our power, in our disposal, in order to fight back, including diplomatic field.
If I may just follow up on that, if the argument from some governments is that they just don't think it will have an impact on the Kremlin and it's not worth cutting off any line of communication with the Russian government at this point, do you see that point of view, and do you think there are risks associated with it?
Of course, this is the decision of Australian government. And as every government, you need to have a line of communication. But again, I am not in the position to be diplomatically polite. Having my parents in bomb shelters, it makes you kind of more decisive. Yes, I will appreciate any kind of push from the Australian government that is possible in order to deliver the messages from Australian side.
Thank you. The next question is from Mark Riley.
Mark Riley, Your Excellency, from the 7 Network. Thank you for your address. The West's justification for not sending troops into Ukraine to help defend your country is essentially that it would spark World War III. Putin has rattled the sabre, he's talked about his nuclear weapons and so forth. In your speech today, you made a couple of really interesting observations. You said Ukraine is basically a buffer between the East and the West. That's the line that's perhaps separating Putin from Europe. Is it, in your belief, you also said that his objective was to reassemble the Soviet Union. Is that his ultimate objective? Do you think that he is looking at Ukraine as an end in itself, or is the West kidding itself? Is it not a question of if there'll be a third world war, but when?
Thank you for the good question. I can only, just small remark, I can only refer to the, I believe 3 days ago, Mr. Putin himself made a remark while meeting, I believe, or discussing something with the Belarusian dictator Lukashenko, that Belarus need access to the Baltic Sea through, actually, Belarus need, if you retranslate this message, that Belarus needs access to the Baltic Sea through the territory of the country that is member of the EU and NATO, Lithuania. So is it clear sign that this is the kind of long-term strategy. I believe so. And Ukraine belongs to the European family, European countries. We are different from Russia. This is one of the narratives that they always play, that Ukraine and Russia is one people. No, never. We were occupied by Russian Empire. We were occupied by Soviet Union, but we are not one people. We have different culture, different language, different mindset. So this is not the case. Thank you.
And the next question is from Jane Norman.
Hello, Mr. Shalkivskyi. Thank you for your speech. Jane Norman from ABC News. We know that from evidence, British, Canadian, American citizens have flown to Ukraine to help locals defend their country. In your speech, you said some of the Australians who'd been contacting your embassy here had travelled to Ukraine to help. Can you give us an idea of in what context have Australians flown to Ukraine to actually help fight? Are they providing support? And can you give us any idea about the numbers of Australians who have actually gone to Ukraine since the invasion began?
I am grateful for the all sincere calls and proposals that we as an embassy receive from Australians who truly would like to help us in every possible way. My answer is yes, our president had clear statement that we would welcome such assistance to fight for our freedom. And we as an embassy will facilitate it, but I always stress that we do not want you guys to get in trouble on your way back home. So please check your legislation. And there are many people who are on their way because they are calling from the airports, not like from the, some of them, of course, are calling from their offices. But the first question is, well, as I mentioned, then, do you have military experience? It's only, we do not have time to train. We do not have instructors to train. It's only related to the people who know how to shoot. And it is not only limited to the people who know how to shoot. If you would like to truly help, we have a lot of work in hospitals. We have many casualties. We have a lot of work in logistics. We have Red Cross on the ground. We have Caritas. We have other humanitarian organizations that you can join and volunteer without weapons in your arms. But it's an adult choice. You have to take into account own consequences. If you decide, we are welcome, but think about consequences. Thank you.
Just to follow up, do you know of any Australians who have taken all of that into account and taken the decision to go over and help fight?
They do not inform me about kind of their final decision. I inform them. I provide support, of course, in terms of giving them information. But again, I stress that please check Australian legislation. And of course, if you decided to go, we will facilitate it. But please consult with the Australian government.
Next question is from Sarah Eisen.
Sarah Eisen from The Australian. Thank you for your speech today. Just to follow up on Jane's question regarding this legislation, the Prime Minister and Foreign Minister has said the legal bounds of people going over and fighting in the Ukraine for Ukraine are unclear. Have you spoken to the PM and Foreign Minister about possibly trying to clarify that or making sure that that can be more clear for people? And secondly, if I may, Australia has sent over some aid, some lethal aid. Is that getting there? Is it making a difference? Because we know it's left, but it's hard to know how it's being felt on the ground. Can you give us an idea of that as well?
Again, believe me, we are only 2 diplomats in the embassy. I do not have time for special consultations. I only can provide information and ask that we will appreciate your help. It can be in humanitarian, in medical, and in military. But we are all grown-ups, so it's your decision. There is Australian government position. We respect it. We do not interfere in any way. I am not an expert in Australian legislation, so this is truly your responsibility to check everything. If you decide to go, we have contact phone numbers and stuff like this. But with regard to the aid that was provided and is in the process of delivering to Ukraine, the cargo plane of Australian Air Force that left on the 2nd of March, I believe, carried non-lethal equipment. So it's medical supply, telecommunication, stuff like this. Military equipment will be channeled through, as I understand, through NATO. So we appreciate this kind of decision by Australian government, and we are preparing for the long-term war. So we will keep this dialogue open. In terms of logistics, well, it's obvious that it's much easier to have this supply done through Europe, not to kind of thinking about how to deliver it from Australia. It's my point of view.
Do you think we might need to provide more lethal aid in the future? You said we're preparing for a long-term war. Do you think that's something that Ukraine might ask of Australia?
Well, right now we need to kind of use the money that is already provided, and they are in the process. If we will be able to reach some kind of peaceful agreement, that will be another story. But my personal view, that, as I mentioned, there is no significant indications on the ground that Russia will stop in nearest time. So we rely on the support of our Western partners.
Thank you. The next question is from Lani Scar.
Lani Scar from the West Australian. Thank you so much for your remarks and your openness. We're obviously seeing horrific scenes in Ukraine, women giving birth in bomb shelters, children's cancer treatment being interrupted, children being killed. Australia has provided $35 million in humanitarian assistance. How much more is needed in that regard to help the vulnerable people on the ground? And you've spoken and said that you are preparing for a lengthy war. How long is this going to go for? I mean, we all want it to end as soon as possible, but are we looking at years that this could go for?
The assistance, decision about assistance that will be provided in terms of humanitarian side will be channeled through international organizations like UN. So it takes some time to be kind of delivered. And of course, depending on the situation on the ground, we will keep this dialogue with the Australian government. And there are already a number of requests from the ordinary people who would like to bring some medical supply or food for children or stuff like this. But the question is, delivery to Europe is cost more than the stuff that you can bring to the embassy. So our position is the best solution at this moment. Just if you wish to help, to assist, send money to our institutions. Ukraine opened special accounts on the National Bank of Ukraine to assist army, to assist people. We have a very good website, ukraine.ua, where all information is kind of channeled. And there are plenty of international humanitarian organizations, Red Cross, Caritas, that are already active. And our Ukrainian community also active in collecting funds here through ukrainecrisisappeal.org. That money that are collected here in Australia. So there are plenty of opportunities to send funding, because in terms of sending humanitarian aid or medical supply from Australia, it's a complicated story. We are thinking about it. We are discussing this opportunity, but it's challenging.
And just on the question in relation to the length of the war.
I don't want to speculate. I don't know. I wish with all bottom of my heart to stop it right now, as probably everyone in this auditorium. Because shelling continues, people are dying. Of course, we are keen to stop it, but not at the price of our statehood and the elimination of our ethnicity.
I'd like to follow up on Lani's question there about the length of the conflict, because one of the big factors out there at the moment is the difficulty of imposing sanctions on Russia when it has support from China. Support from China in the form of purchasing coal, oil, and wheat we've seen. What is your view of the assistance that China has been offering Russia in this conflict so far? What's your message on that key fact?
I am not an expert in terms of China, but what is obvious is that Russia effectively cut all their ties with West, is actually have to concentrate on Asia as the only window of opportunities to the external world. So I believe they have to sell their resources cheap enough in order for Asia to look at it. And at the end of the day, Russian citizens will lose, because Russian economy will suffer due to those kind of situation when you have to propose significant amount of goods, resources to the new markets, where actually a situation was stable before this. So in order to enter that market, you actually have to propose very low price. I don't know how you can other way negotiate commercial contracts, or propose some kind of political concessions. But this is just my assumption. I'm not China's expert.
But does that mean China's going to get resources from Russia at low prices? And therefore, are you even suggesting there's an advantage for China in the current conflict?
Probably to some extent, yes.
What's your position on whether China should then join the sanctions against Russia?
We approach all our partners to join this and have solidarity with us. And this is not about China, it's about all countries. We would like to have strong international support of our position, and we will appreciate any kind of impact that other governments can make on Kremlin in order to stop killing our civilians and children.
Our next question is from Daniel Hurst.
Daniel Hurst from Guardian Australia. I just wanted to ask you to clarify two things you said earlier. One is, you said the Australian suppliers that left about a week ago were all non-lethal equipment. The government here has announced $70 million in lethal aid. Is it your understanding that all of that is funded, as in it's a $70 million funding contribution to NATO, and then that they'll supply the equipment? In other words, Australia is not supplying any ammunition or weapons directly?
This is the decision and the kind of responsibility of Australian government, how exactly they channel those funds. As far as I know, this is military equipment military aid that includes non-lethal equipment that was on that cargo plane. Non-lethal, as I mentioned. And the rest comes with other type of equipment and weapons that is coordinated by NATO, or yeah, I believe so. So, as you can imagine, we require a lot of assistance, but there needs to be coordination in order to avoid duplicity. So, having strong coordination is actually very important for us to deliver specific weapon and equipment and ammunition that we need, and not and avoid duplicity.
The other point of clarity was about the people who are going over to fight on the side of Ukraine. Is it your understanding that Ukraine's government will categorise those international volunteers as actually being part of Ukraine's armed forces?
There was a clear statement by our president. There is actually a website, fightforua.org. There is a clear description, what is it about. We do not have, of course, a lot of information because it's just started. But the statement was clear. If you would like to join, you are welcome. But of course, taking into account that our military, well, in terms of communication, yes, especially on the battlefield, language plays a very important role, yes? That is why creating those foreign legion makes coordination is easier, yes? When you have commander to coordinate, not the kind of bigger quantity of people who speak different language.
But that's the key question in Australian law, whether it's part of the armed forces officially.
It is included in the Territorial Defense Force of Ukraine. It's part of our defense force.
The next question is from Dominic Giannini.
Dominic Giannini from the Australian Associated Press. We've heard a lot about humanitarian assistance and at home how we're trying to help Ukrainian refugees. We've sent the Hercules plane over there to deliver humanitarian assistance. Should Australia provide direct assistance to facilitate Ukrainian refugees from countries like Poland and directly bring them over here, women, children, families, and facilitate that safe passage to Australia? Is that something you'd like to see, and do you want to see a specific cap or a specific number?
Thank you for the question. It's still under discussion. Yes, the numbers already in Poland and some other countries neighboring to the west are huge. Well, people, children, families with the children, women with the children. Under these circumstances, some of them do not have enough documents because they left in a hurry. It's a challenging question that it cannot be done overnight. It requires significant consultations. Of course, we would like to do it as fast as possible, but this needs to be done through coordination center because there are many countries already involved, and there needs to be kind of joint approach how to deal with those people who have only national ID and not foreign passport, and what type of visa they will receive, what is duration of that visa. I am not an expert. Of course, as a representative of Ukraine, I would like to have as much assistance as possible. But again, this needs to be done through coordinated decision, because there are many countries in Europe that also join in this initiative to help Ukraine. So Poland right now bears probably the heaviest burden in terms of receiving our people and helping them. Hopefully, we will have clarity how to proceed further in coming days or week. We will appreciate, of course, as much assistance as possible, but This is the decision of the government of Australia.
So should Australian planes be in Europe facilitating the movement of refugees through that coordination centre?
Well, there are kind of many countries involved, as I mentioned, yes, because there is a closed airspace in Ukraine. So planes actually coming only from Poland or from Romania. There are actually pretty good connection flights through Middle East to Australia, commercial flights, I mean. But again, as for me, in order to send the plane for someone, you need to decide how many, on the what conditions, for how long, and so on. So it is required significant coordinated response and decision, again, with other countries.
Thanks. The next question is from Finn McHugh.
Finn McHugh at the Canberra Times. Ambassador, thanks for your speech. Reports coming out of the US suggest that the Pentagon is prepared and preparing to fund a long-term insurgency in your country. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton even cited Afghanistan as a potential model to suck in Russian resources. I'm wondering whether you're concerned your Western allies are prepared to accept a longer-term war, potentially creating a quagmire, potentially at the cost of Ukrainian lives, provided it hits Vladimir Putin's regime harder.
We would like to stop the war as soon as possible, but not by giving up our freedom. Of course, there might be different scenarios, but I can only refer to the situation on the ground now. 13 days in war, Russia lost, that is kind of confirmed from our side, around 70 military jets and bombardments. They had around 450 jets, military jets, on our borders before the attack starts. So it means that we, during 13 days, we shoot down more than 10% of their air force. Of course, there are additional, altogether I believe they have 1,500, but it's on the paper. It looks like they brought to the border everything that can fly, actually. So 13 days, more than 10% of their air might. How long Russia is ready to sustain such losses? And I am not a military expert, but again, I believe you see the level of resistance that come even from ordinary people, and the big surprise for Russian commanders, and surprise, also shock coming from soldiers that they were not told that nobody will welcome them here, and they learn it with high price, but they are killing our civilians and children.
And just to follow up on that, we talk a lot about symbolism in politics and Russia being surprised by the resistance. How important has the symbolism of President Zelensky remaining in Kyiv and fighting himself been in marshalling that response among your people?
Of course it's important. And talking about symbolism, it's also important to remind that Nazi Germany bombarded Kyiv at 4 a.m. in the morning when people were sleeping. And Russian Kremlin Nazis bombarded our cities at 5 a.m. in the morning, where people, while people were sleeping. They were speculated that those are just military installations. You can see those pictures. Well, if it is continuous bombardment of regular bombardment of civilian residential areas, during number of days. To my mind, it's a genocide. If it is not genocide, what's the definition of genocide then?
Thank you.
One of President Zelensky's very strong messages has been that he wants a no-fly zone over Ukraine. The message from NATO is that they won't, that they'll defend every inch of their territory, but they won't go into Ukraine. And of course, there is a strategic argument about the risk of a no-fly zone to those who enforce it in terms of turning it into a direct conflict between NATO and Russia. I thought we should explore that because that's one issue that's on the table to try and bring a swifter resolution or end to the war. Can you accept any part of that argument that comes from the West that it's simply too dangerous to try and enforce a no-fly zone over Ukraine?
Again, I don't want to speculate about something that I have little expertise, but I answer another question. Was this war imminent? Was there a possibility to prevent that war? My answer, yes. This war was possible to prevent by sanctions that were imposed by our Western partners after the war. We asked our partners to impose those sanctions before the attack. We believe it would change the decision of Kremlin, but our Western partners did not want to irritate or give pretext for or kind of in terms of Kremlin's position. So we believe that Kremlin, Mr. Putin, respects only strength, strong position, united position. And if there is a strong united position in every aspect, there are also speculations about the possibility of nuclear war. Well, again, I cannot make assumptions or speculate on it. I can only say that it's when you look at Mr. Putin, it's clearly he afraid to die. He is sitting 30 meters from the foreign leaders who visit him. If he so brave enough, if he is kind of so strong, why he is kind of having those partners so long distance?